Take a deep breath out. Push it all out of your lungs, all the air out of your lungs. Now take a deep, deep breath in. Deeper than that, you can go deeper. Hold at the top. Now breathe out. Get grounded. And today, welcome in fam, much love, Trav here. Please enjoy with me the sunshine, this bird song, as we take a walk around and discuss one of my favorite, most interesting topics, why Bitcoin. And if you're interested in the history, governments, money, the future, where things may be going, how to get ahead, how to not to spend the rest of your life in a 9-to-5, how to become a sovereign individual, become a landholder, have fuck you money, the ability to say no, the ability to do what you want to do for you and your family, then welcome in fam, much love, Trav here. You're in the right place today as we're going to have a very interesting discussion on why Bitcoin. So welcome in and let's get into it. And as always, appreciate you for being here. If you find this video useful, if you're excited, hit the thumbs up button and we'll get into it. Okay, so just before we get into the sort of the history of government is where I want to start. Just for transparency, I have a majority of my wealth in Bitcoin, and so I have skin in the game, whether you think that's a good or a bad thing. That's just for transparency. It's probably obvious, but for transparency. And I came to these conclusions before investing, and it's not so much backwards rationalization of why I did it. And this isn't financial advice. I'm not necessarily telling you to do it. I'm explaining why I did, why it made sense. And but I do think it's a good idea, although I think it depends a lot on individual situations. I have one friend who's asking me if he should invest in Bitcoin. He's a construction, carpentry, electrician, plumbing business. And I told him no, not to invest in Bitcoin. He should save his money to make a down payment on a home, because that's what he understands. And then I have another friend who is an online business, and at the time, no, you shouldn't invest in Bitcoin because you should invest in leveling up your skills in advertising and making more money online, come back to it. And for some of you, you need to go to school first, or you need to invest in your health first. So it's not for everyone. But if you are interested in the future, and you imagine yourself having some disposable income later, and you dream of bigger things, then it may be for you. Now, with that out of the way, let's get into this interesting conversation about starting with the government. So, philosophical question is, what is the role of governments? Well, I think that we could probably agree that the primary role of governments is a protection service. Basically, they protect your body, they protect your property. Governments, we allow governments to have a monopoly on violence. The police, the army, the military, threats of punishment, the penitentiary, the jail system, the courts. We allow the government to have a monopoly on violence, which is meant to use to protect us in an equitable, fair way. And we pay them to do that, and we pay them in two main ways. One is in taxation, the other is in inflation. So we pay the government to protect us. And this became very necessary in the agricultural age because it's so easy to take somebody's land or take somebody's crops, especially if you're a knight or a samurai, you're a strong person, you're a warrior. So as we had the emergence of people who are owning land, that's really when government, when money, when currency, everything came together to protect. Because if you don't have government to protect land, it's just chaos. And you see this throughout history. You have roving barbarians, warriors, bandits just come on and they steal your sheep, and they or they raise your land. So that's the primary historical role of government. Now, it does a lot of other things, and some of those things are quite nice, but basically it's a protection service, especially for protecting land, but also protecting money in terms of gold and other and other sort of assets. Now, what's really interesting about Bitcoin is arguably the first asset in history that can be set up in such a way that it can't be stolen. So you go through history, and the majority of technological innovations up to this point have been offensive, aggressive. Like you have the gunpowder. You have nuclear weapons. You had swords. You had war horses. You have chemical warfare. Things that make it easy to do violence, to take land and resources, and so on. And there are examples of defensive technology, like a lock is a defensive technology, a safety deposit box is a defensive technology. Some violent technologies are inherently defensive, like stationary machine guns. And you have passwords are defensive technology. But we've never really had a defensive technology quite like cryptography. So cryptocurrencies use encryption and cryptography. If you store your Bitcoin correctly, no one can steal it. And it's not just someone can beat you up and steal the password in your brain. You could also set it up as a multi-signature thing where you need a couple different checkpoints. One person is not enough to unlock the Bitcoin. So basically, this is the first time in history where you can have an asset that the government or anyone cannot take from you. They cannot steal it from you. You don't need the security protection of government to protect your Bitcoin. You need the security protection of the government to protect your land, especially when historically you see when times turn to shit, whether that's through the collapse of the Roman Empire, the collapse of the feudal system, or you have the collapse of currencies. The pressure is put on the weakest holders, and that pressure is often put on them through violence. So you have people's lands get seized, whether that's again by the governments, by barbarians, or bandits or criminals, or people just claiming your land, roving gangs in the countryside that are hungry. So for the first time, you have something that can't be taken from you. You don't need the protection of the government. It is in fact protected from the government, and you can easily take it with you. You could take it with you in your head when fleeing a country. Historically, in times of flight, like it's sort of hard to flee with capital. Fiat money is sort of easier to is okay. I mean, it's not as good as Bitcoin, but you can take all your wealth with you when you have to flee, when times get sort of crazy. Something that's really interesting about that is that it's you don't need the protection of government necessarily when you have Bitcoin, at least for your property rights. You may still want the protection of Bitcoin for your physical person, that someone doesn't assault you, but people usually assault you because they want something from you. And if there's no way that they can get it, then the returns on violence are a lot less. Like the returns on violence, there's not as much of a reason to be violent now because you can't get people's wealth, right? Or at least we're headed in that direction. So that's a lot of the reasons for why Bitcoin, as times turn to shit, it's a very safe thing to hold. Now, it's also, interestingly, is a protection from the government in two ways. So we talk about the government sells its protection services to you, and they fund it from you in two ways. The first one is the less obvious one, is inflation, and the second one is taxation. So taxation we know about. They tax you, and by taxing you, have the sheep getting out. That's what they do. They just hop over this fence. By taxing you, they're taking your money, and by inflating the currency, they're also taking your money. If you hold any of the money and they increase the supply of it, in essence, they diminish your slice of the pie. So Bitcoin fights against taxation and inflation, both. So the first way that it fights inflation is that it's limited supply. There's 21 million, right? 21 million coins. It's convincingly scarce. Through game theory, we've reached a Nash equilibrium, which is where all the parties that are involved see no reason to change the rules. There's a critique that in over 100 years, when there's no more Bitcoin being mined, that the security of the system will be jeopardized, and that may be true, but that's 100 years out, so don't necessarily need to worry about that. Let's see. Yeah, these sheep are getting out. But yeah, it's you can store your dollars. You're going to be stolen from inflation. You store your Bitcoin. There's 21 million. It's predictable. It has a transparent supply schedule. Protects you from inflation. Now, Bitcoin also protects you from taxation in an interesting way. And this, I'm going to share a personal plan with Bitcoin and also lessons from ultra wealthy people. If you want to be wealthy, think like the wealthy. First, Bitcoin cannot be seized. They can threaten to seize it from you, but it cannot be seized. Again, this is if you store it in a secure way. If you have it in an exchange, yes, it can be seized. The other way is when you sell in capital gains, that's when you're getting taxed. I live in Hawaii. If I were to sell my Bitcoin, the capital gains tax is 11% in Hawaii, and the highest long-term capital gains currently, although they're talking about raising it. And in times where the governments are sort of falling apart, they tend to continue to raise taxation. And we can come back to that, but 20%, so 30% when you sell, you're taxed. But this is what the ultra wealthy do, is the ultra wealthy do not ever sell their assets. They float a certain amount of debt against their assets, using their assets as collateral. So Bitcoin, and this is also why Bitcoin and not other things, because with other things, you may need to sell them when they go up. With Bitcoin, it's something that you can buy with a plan to hold forever. And if you plan to hold forever, you don't have to ever sell, and there's never any tax burden. And it also makes already, and in the future, but especially already, a very attractive collateral. So you can get really quality loans from your Bitcoin. And those loans allow you to enjoy, at a low interest rate, the fruits of your Bitcoin accruing value without having to pay taxes. So it's a way to avoid paying taxes as well, which is pretty cool, pretty interesting, and that's the game plan. You know, me personally, I plan to never sell. Why will I never sell? And when people say never sell, what do they mean? Well, it's for this reason, because instead of selling, you can take out collateralized debt. So are we in a situation where our government is sort of in decline? It could be. I mean, some possible signs that this are happening is just we see the standards of life of people going down. Sheep, sheep, sheep. Is baby gonna come along? We see go that way. This lamb, trying to move this lamb. There we go. We see the quality of people's lives going down. We see the control of the money going down. We see governments grasping for power more. We see a lot more political dissatisfaction. I'm gonna get this bucket over here. We see a lot more dislike of politicians and bureaucrats. We see increased taxation. We see increased inflation. We see, I mean, the U.S. pulling out of Afghanistan is actually a possible sign of things aren't going so well fiscally, fewer resources militarily. So there's a number of signs that our government is, or the current way of the world is sort of in decline, and as things get crazier and more unstable, something that's anti-fragile like Bitcoin is a very attractive hold. And yeah, so why not other projects also? Why Bitcoin? Why not other projects? Well, it's for all the reasons we talked about. None of the other projects, or few of them, are verifiably scarce in the way that Bitcoin is. They have history of change, or they're not, they have attack vectors that haven't yet been fully tested, where they're Dino projects, decentralized in name only. Some of them can be very, very attractive and wonderful investments. However, that doesn't mean that it's necessarily good long-term buy and hold. The beautiful thing about the long-term buy and hold is that you don't have to worry about taxation if your buy and hold is a attractive collateral, which in the case of Bitcoin is. Nolani, come on, get him! Get him! Get him! Come on, get him! Get him! Shoot, shoot, shoot! Get him! Shoot! Get him, get him! Shoot, 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 shoot! Shoot! She's in training. Come on, sheeps. Well, that didn't work at all. Sheep getting out. Sort of figure this out. Come on, sheeps. Yeah, so that's why Bitcoin, again, it's not for everyone. You might be at a time in your life where it doesn't really make sense to have a financial investment, or it makes sense to invest in something else that you understand better. Or it might make sense to do this, or at least in the future, because I think there's a huge amount of growth ahead still. We have maybe 100 million users out of 7 billion people in the world. So there's another 70x in terms of users. So there's a lot of potential still. Okay, I hope you found that helpful. If you did find it helpful, please hit the thumbs up button. And I guess personal update for me is that I've got a blog. I'm starting to blog again, and I'm putting the link to the blog in the description. And I'm going to be talking about a lot of different interesting topics. Also a personal update, which I'll come back and talk about more in depth. But I'm taking sort of a sabbatical from work. I'm going part-time. This is enabled. A lot of it's enabled by Bitcoin. And I'm going to be spending this time to read quite a bit more, study more. I've got a book list if you're interested in that. I'll be talking about it on my blog. I'm going to be writing more, and I'm really excited. And I'm going to be around more. Not necessarily like online more, but I'm going to be creating more. I'm going to continue with YouTube, but I'm also going to be doing more blog format writing. So lots of ideas coming out. I'm going to be leveling up by reading a lot of interesting stuff. So hope you found it interesting and useful. Appreciate you. Much love, and talk to you soon. Peace.